The Gaelic Irish never used the word Viking. Recently, I saw someone describe himself as Viking. Now, whatever Scandinavian ancestry you may have or not have, the term Viking itself doesn't mean what people think it means. Viking comes from the old word Viking-er, which simply meant a sea raider or pirate. It described an activity, not a race, not a nationality, not an ethnicity. The Irish sources never called these people Vikings. They called them Gael, which means foreigners. Sometimes Gael, Fingal, this would be dark or fair foreigners. There's a huge debate on what that means. Like, does it mean what they looked like, hair color? Or, some people say it's Norse versus Danes. There's various meanings. Maybe some of them had sallow skin, some of them were more white-skinned. It's not quite talked about in the annals what that actually means and the differentiation. But the essence of all of it is Gael, foreigners. There's different variations on Gael, as Gael, Gaheel, and there's a bunch of different ones because there was Irish foreigner. Basically, they remained foreigners for a very long time in the eyes of the Irish, no matter how long they were here for. But the point is, they were not called Vikings. By the time of the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, many of the Scandinavian descended communities in places like Limnock and Corkig, Ballyauclia, Port Lorga, the name goes on. They've been nearly here for 2 centuries. They had intermarried, they spoke Irish, they were politically embedded in Irish kingdoms. So when people say Vikings fought on both sides at Clontarf, what do you mean by that exactly? Hiberno-Scandinavian peoples that have been long settled. For instance, on the side of Brian, the few that fought at those battles were so irrelevant they weren't even named in the annals of Ireland except for Waterford because of Brian Boru's long-standing relationship with Ivar of Waterford. These people were half Irish at this point, some 3/4 Irish, speaking Gaeilge. Brian Boru had dismantled Limnock in the 970s. Limnock was literally a shell of what it used to be under Ivar of Limerick, the last true Norse king of Limerick. The only ones really at the Battle of Clontarf that you could equate to the umbrella term Vikings are the ones from the Kingdom of the Isles, because they were Norse, especially Sigurd of Orkney. He was a Norse commander, a Norse king of Orkney, and he had a battalion of Norse warriors. The ones further down, the Kingdom of Man, they were probably a little bit more Gaelicized, but they were still half Norse, half Gael. But they were going Viking at the Battle of Clontarf because they were literally coming as Viking mercenaries backing up the Kingdom of Dublin and part Kingdom of Leinster, because people assume that the whole of Leinster revolted against Brian Boru. This is not true. Actually, Maelmorda did not have full support at the Battle of Clontarf. He did not have all the petty kings under his influence at the Battle of Clontarf. There was definitely the southwest of Leinster, down by Ossory, that was not under Maelmorda at the time. Technically it was, but they were not supportive. They remained neutral, essentially. So the point is here, the closest ones to the quote-unquote Vikings at the Battle of Clontarf were the ones that were coming from the Kingdom of the Isles. It's very difficult because we're not going to get rid of this word, right? Because it makes it simpler to describe a very complex situation, but it does flatten out the nuance. In essence, Viking was something you did. It was never who you were. And our history deserves that level of respect by this point. If you fought a pitched battle for Brian Boru after being settled and a descendant of the so-called Vikings, this is not what a Viking is. The closest ones to that on the day were the ones that came down and actually landed on the shores. Actually landed on the shores from a foreign land that were full Norse, that were here to take the spoils of war, had zero connection to the land, and were upset with Brian Boru's reign. So that's the closest to the Vikings at the Battle of Clontarf. I don't know how many more times I have to say this. But if you're going to call yourself a Viking, make sure you understand what you mean by that. You mean that you're some sort of sea raider or pirate, It sounds kind of ridiculous at this point. If you're interested in these type of stories and these type of articles, I do have a mailing list. There are weekly articles going out that cover these things in a little bit more detail, and also I do let people know about certain premieres, videos, etc. But the most important part of that weekly email is the news article, story, and some thoughts from myself. So if you're interested in that, make sure you sign up. In the pinned comment, there's a link, and also in the description. If you want to support the mission, www.bertiebrosnan.com, where you can donate and you can buy my book, buy the signed copies as well if you're interested. Any of this support means a huge amount, and it keeps the operations up and running. Thank you so much. Garamila Mahagwiv Galir Makorja, Bay Made It Kint, Slangafol.